folks, my name is Jen, and today I am here to talk to you about all the books that I read in May. Was it May? Yes, okay, we are in June. Oh my god. So over the course of May, I ended up reading like 10 books. So yeah, let's get into everything that I read this month. I think we're just gonna do it chronologically because that's how I wrote my notes. So the first book that I ended up reading in May was actually like a carryover. I'd started it in like April, I think, and that was Spinsters in Jeopardy by Niall Marsh. So this features, again, Chief Inspector Allen, or Chief Inspector Roderick Allen, excuse me. He's back again in this book. This time he was on vacation with his wife, the artist Agatha Troy, and their little boy Ricky. While they are off to drop in on a distant relation of Troy's, Allen is also going to be trying to infiltrate this like mansion nearby where there's like a cult full of drug smugglers, but all of his plans get a little more complicated when on the way over they end up needing to help this older woman on the train get medical attention. There is definitely something about Alan's character when he is handling situations where his loved ones have been kind of pulled into potential danger that I think really brings out the best in him as a character. At this point, I've read like, what, 3 or 4 other books? This might have either been my 4th or my 5th book of Niall Marsh's I've read at this point. I can't remember which. So, I mean, take that with a grain of salt. I have read a few books with Roderick Allen, but I couldn't say a lot about his character, I guess, like I could about Hercule Poirot, for example, where I've read a ton more of Agatha Christie's books featuring him than I have of Niall Marsh's. But, yeah, take what I say with a grain of salt, but I think it brings out the best in his character. I really like how he proceeded throughout this book. Funny, and sweet with his family. He is very protective of them. Otherwise, he's getting down to business. I just think it brings out like the best in him overall. I really like the chapters, I think, that followed his wife, Agatha Troy, a lot more, though. I find her to be a very interesting character, and I enjoy the chapters featuring her, I think, a lot more than any of the others. And their son also is just really cute overall. There's plenty of intrigue throughout this book. The cult itself was, honestly, I think, pretty ridiculous. To be honest, when I was going into this book, it didn't become absolutely ridiculous as I thought it was going to be, just based on, you know, the cover saying, "A fresh victim for the Black Mass," and then drugs, the Black Mass, murder, and this quotation up top which says, "The smoke eddied and whirled, and there, on the altar, it appeared, horned and shining, a silver goat whose hide glittered through the smoke. The door to the left of the altar it opened. It admitted a naked man." Like, all of this sounds absolutely bonkers, and I kind of went into this book assuming that it was going to, on one level, offend the shit out of me, and on another level, be incredibly amusing. And it actually wasn't like what I was expecting at all. I was definitely prepared to be rolling my eyes the whole time, but at the end of the day, I don't think that's really what Marsh's, like, intent was with this. Itself, like, there were different spiritual practices that were definitely cobbled together in a incredibly appalling manner. Little bit of like imagination thrown in as well, but I don't think that was done with like some negative intentions really about anyone in like the practice of the occult. I don't think that's what Marsh was going for. I think she was doing that as a way of showing, you know, this is how like legitimately certifiable the leader of this whole group is. Also to show, hey, it's just a bunch of malarkey that is used as a cover, like a shitty front for this big like smuggling ring that is the ultimate like issue here, is the smuggling ring. And yeah, to just like showcase how much the cheese had slid off the cult leader's cracker, like he is. Bro's bonkers. Something I really also liked about this book, though, was how fast-paced everything was. There were a couple of moments when it felt like time was dragging a little bit, but the rest of the time it was very, very rushed. I actually had to flip back a couple of times to remind myself that, like, all of the events in here were taking place within, like, 36 to 48 hours of the initial introduction-ish, sort of. So, types in here, not so fun. But this is an older book. This one was published in 1954. So it's kind of par for the course. Dates it, but I'm honestly, I think when I finished this book, I was still on the fence with Marsh's work overall, but I did find it to be a pretty engaging read, and I gave this 4 stars. The second book that I read was Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Snogging by Louise Renison. So this is the first in a series, The Confessions of Georgia Nicholson. So this follows 15-year-old Georgia as she writes her hilarious confessions featuring all her like British schoolgirl worries, like surviving her prison-esque school is how she sees it, dealing with like social drama, friend drama and stuff like that, and also worrying about the various parts of herself that she's subconscious about. Throw in some like really cute boys and her bonkers family, and you're basically in for like a lot of hilarity. I really loved this series when I was a teenager. Like, I adored it. I thought it was the funniest shit at the time. And I quoted this a lot. There is, I think I mentioned it before, possibly, but there is, Georgia and her friends create a snogging scale. Snogging is kissing, in case you didn't know. And it just basically goes from like everything from holding hands down to the full Monty. And it's so ridiculous, but I very clearly remember this being like a thing that me and my friends laughed about and were constantly updating each other on how far we'd gotten on the scale with our significant others or whatever at that point is. Just, that was nostalgic. So, and also a little cringy. Yeah, this, it's just so delightfully British, and it still made me crack up a lot. It is really interesting, though, how time can, like, change your viewings of media. I think I've talked about this before with other books. I think most recently in, like, March or whatever, when I did, like, middle grade March. Like, as a teen, this was just, like, pure entertainment. This, you know. But, like I said, with the stocking scale and everything, I think I did treat this partly as a guide to dealing with boys, sort of, but not exactly. Because I didn't know how to deal with boys at the time, so my guidebooks were this, the Princess Diaries series, and fucking 17 magazine. Okay, so that's basically where I was at the time. Not great advice, in all honesty. But Yeah, and I remember relating a little bit to the main character, not in not in a lot of ways, but just in like a couple of ways of feeling like, you know, the self-conscious bits, and also just if you're kind of funny, is like a boy going to like that you're funny and you're not just like just cute and hanging on his every word, but you're like funny too, kind of like a thing, a little bit, sort of. Yeah. Um, Looking at this series now, I honestly, for the most time, like, I said it's nostalgic, and it was, but it was also a little embarrassing. The cringe was real in here, you guys. I was entertained, but I just, I kept, like, hiding my face at certain parts because it just felt too much like something ridiculous that me and my friends would have said or done in our high school years, and it was just a lot. I felt bad overall also for Georgia. She's so funny, but a lot of her humor is like self-deprecating. There's so much self-consciousness within her. She's constantly focused on how others perceive her, especially focusing on how to make herself as desirable as possible to the opposite sex, and constantly worrying that she's going to like end up alone, or um, she's going to end up being like a crazy cat lady or something. I just found that to be pretty sad overall. I think most of us have probably been there, obsessing over how you look or sound and whether or not anyone would want to snog you at some point, just worrying about that. It was just kind of sad to see so much of her time spent worrying about shit like that and constantly doing things to try to make yourself be more appealing. Like she said, practicing smiling in her mirror where she doesn't let her nostrils flare out and show how big her nose is, or like trying to bleach her hair or deal with her eyebrows or whatever, and like face masks, and doing just a lot of different things, worrying about all of these like superficial things, which I know is like such a large part of being a teenager a lot of the time, just worrying constantly about how other people are seeing you, and like worrying, I notice these terrible things about myself. I'm sure everyone else notices it as well. Honestly, most of the time, no one does. Or if they do, they're not going to draw attention to it because that's mean. It's only really the assholes that are going to like say something. And unfortunately, high school is full of assholes. This also there are some parts of this that did not age well as well. I've also talked about this before, that like this series is like a time capsule example, like I said, of what life was like in the early 2000s. So there are things that don't hold up and aren't quite as funny as they were at the time. So, yeah. But I did still honestly have a lot of fun rereading this, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to continuing my way through, like rereading the rest of the series and then like finishing it. So, I gave this 4 stars. The next book I read was Understood Betsy by Dorothy Canfield Fisher. So this is following fragile, very anxious orphan Elizabeth Ann. She is sent to live with her relatives in Vermont when her aunts are taken ill in the city. Betsy has always been like coddled and kind of emotionally suffocated by her nervous caretakers. So basically this was like, will her time with her kind country family help give her a new look on life, basically. So I adored this book. I loved it. I admit that I did have some misgivings while I was reading the first chapter because Betsy is such an anxious little girl. Though honestly, a lot of the anxiety in her life seems to have been caused by like the adults around her, constantly expressing like their own worries and fears and like placing those on her. And I honestly had some like complicated feelings about that, and like I think reading into it a little too much maybe about like what is she trying to say about families like that, as someone who is an anxious person, was a very anxious child, although everyone in my life at the time called it being a worrywart, and just being like that kind of person who was also surrounded by a couple of very anxious adults who did worry about things and who honestly probably did cause some of my anxiety as a kid. I basically started this book feeling a certain type of way. A little defensive about it, I guess. But that definitely quickly changed. The Putney relatives in here. So that consists of Uncle Henry, Aunt Abigail, and Cousin Anne. They are delightful. Uncle Henry does not say much, but he's very kind and thoughtful. Cousin Anne is a little more abrasive, but ultimately when Betsy's able to like do or say things that pleases her, it feels like, you know, just an accomplishment that she's like, you know, happy with, you know, how Betsy is like turning out. Aunt Abigail sounds like she probably gives the absolute best hugs ever. I love her. I just want to like walk into this book and hug her. Betsy is taught like right from the very beginning how to do things. Immediately from the moment she arrives, like Uncle Henry is like, hey, you're gonna drive the horse cart home, and it's like, oh shit, like that kind of thing. She's basically taught right from the beginning. She's very unsure and anxious about everything. She was never taught how to drive a horse cart or set a table or make applesauce and just like a bunch of other activities that they assign her, basically, which are also activities that probably a lot of kids at that time would have already been taught how to do. You know, she's like 9 at the beginning of the book. So yeah, all of those things people would probably know how to do at the time. What I think made my heart so happy about like these instances though was how her family handled her uncertainty. Like a couple of times there were a couple of times when, you know, for example, at one point they're churning butter and she didn't know really that was like a thing, and she didn't know how to do it because she grew up in the city and like nobody did that kind of thing there. And so her family is like surprised a couple of times when she doesn't know about certain things or she doesn't know how to do certain things, but they're never like belittling her or shaming her for not knowing them. And she has some ignorance about these things, but it's not like ultimately not really her fault because she has never been taught or allowed to do a lot of these things because she was so coddled and her previous caretakers were so like nervous all the time. So she just hasn't been given the opportunities. So I really liked how her Putney relatives handle things by never like shaming her or belittling her at all for not knowing how to do things, just simply being like, oh, okay, and giving her simple instructions and, you know, letting her complete the tasks. And each time it was like she's gaining more self-confidence. She's actually thinking for herself. She's like learning different things. When she goes to school, it's the same thing. She's, like I said, she's taught how to actually like think instead of just being shuffled along through school. How school grades were handled, or rather not handled, sort of, as like it's a one-room schoolhouse that she goes to, and she's taught like reading, writing, arithmeticing at like all different grade levels, because it's like how far she is in progression. It doesn't really matter what grade she's in, it's where she's at in each topic. It kind of sounded like the Montessori system to me, so I did look up more about this book, because I was like that, because I went to like traditional public school, but I know just from like the internet vague things about the Montessori system. So fun fact about Dorothy Canfield Fisher that I learned after reading this: she is actually one of the people who's responsible for bringing or helping to bring the Montessori system to the US, and she actually wrote like a couple of books about it. It is the Montessori method, I think is the name of one of them. And if you don't know what that is, per Wikipedia, it says it stresses the development of a child's own initiative and natural abilities, especially through practical play. This method allows children to develop at their own pace, which related back to like the heart of this book overall, is Betsy being given the chance to learn things at her own pace, given freedom and the experience to like know and learn how to do things. And you know, it really does wonders for her over the course of the book, as like new situations are thrown at her that originally would have probably made her completely crumble. Instead, she like uses her head and handles things as best as she can figure out how to handle them. I really loved seeing like the growth in Betsy, her growing love for her relatives and like their love for her, and like her interactions with like her schoolmates and animals. She's given a kitten when she gets to the farm, which was one of my favorite bits. Besides finding like independence and like confidence in herself, I think another important part of this book, and what ultimately was like my favorite part, which is what had me like crying over this thing, was Betsy being able to try to like finding a sense of belonging and finding a sense of like happiness instead of just like existing. And I loved this book so much. I know already, immediately upon finishing this book, that no matter what, this is going to be on my favorite reads of the year list. No matter what, this instantly. I loved it so much. I gave this 5 stars. Then I read Beauty by Robin McKinley. So this is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. Beauty's recently impoverished family moves to a rural area to like start over, and her father returns home after an encounter with like this terrible beast. She ends up having to venture to the beast's enchanted castle and be his captive to save her father's life. The beast is kind but cursed, and every night he hopes she will agree to marry him, but who could ever learn to love a beast? So this retelling is fairly close to the original tale, or like versions of the original tale that I've like read before in like compilation books of fairy tales. Except for once, I think this is one of the few adaptations that I've read that follows closely to the original, where Belle's sisters are actually quite delightful. They're not evil, selfish harpies like they normally are in some of the fairy tale retellings. Yeah, they're nice. They're fairly one-dimensional though, but still nice, sympathetic. I liked also that this was trying to place Beauty's world more in like ours than in like some fantasy realm. It was set in the past. I'm guessing, just based on like some of the context clues, that this was somewhere in England based on the name, so not France like normal. And probably in the 1600s, maybe the 1700s, but most likely 1600s, I'm thinking. The castle was very interesting, and that's one of my gripes about this book, actually, was that I would honestly have liked to learn more about it. I would have liked more details in how it worked, how the curse worked, and overall gotten a better, like, clearer layout of all of the rooms. Everything just seemed kind of like wealth thrown around, and then Beauty just feeling like an ugly duckling who doesn't deserve anything the whole time. You know, the only memorable spots that were mentioned here were, like, the library, of course, the gallery room, and, like, the art gallery, and then, like, the gardens surrounding the castle. I could not tell you anything about the rest of it. Like, I think she kind of describes the dining room at one point, and her bedroom a little bit, but, like, it wasn't very memorable because I finished this earlier in May and I could not describe either of those things to you now. Except I think maybe the bedroom had a 4-poster bed. Maybe? I don't quite remember. And that's, like, a shame that I can't recall any of this and that there weren't enough descriptions about it, because it sounded like it was very large and lavish, but all we're told is that it's large and lavish, and we don't get any more details, and we don't see other things within the room. Like, what else is there? Is there a study? Is there a map room? Is there a ballroom? Is there, like, a nursery somewhere? What is going on? Is there, like, a greenhouse? What is happening in this castle? We don't know. So, yeah, that's one gripe I had about this, was that I would have liked to know more about the castle and more about the curse itself than what we got. Beauty herself, honestly, was a bit annoying in the beginning, with just having her go on and on about how she's so ugly and she's so masculine and her sisters are gorgeous and graceful and lovely, but everyone just treats her like one of the guys, but she got the brains out of the bunch, and almost kind of like a pick-me girl, but she wasn't trying to get male attention necessarily, so I guess also not like a pick-me girl. It's just very, I don't know, I found it immature, but I did, though, come to like her over the course of the book, or at least I didn't hate her. The Beast was the Beast. He's like the Beast in any retelling of Beauty and the Beast, pretty much. He's sad and he's broody, but he's also kind. In all honesty, the Disney adaptation Beast has more personality than the Beast did in this book. This is a retelling of the original fairy tale, like I said. It definitely stays true to the fact that the Beast doesn't have much of a personality in that book either. He's been cursed for years. It's like, can we have some more info about his life, his past, himself? And at one point this was gone into, but it just kind of felt like a cop-out on the author's part to act like, well, he's been without a companion other than, like, the invisible magic servants who hang around. Like, they're the only ones he has to chat with, and obviously he doesn't chat with them, so he doesn't have a companion of his own standing to chat with for so long, he just doesn't remember things about himself anymore. And it's like, what? Did the man not keep a journal? Does he not have any history about his family? He just can't remember shit? Like, what is happening here? So, that was also something that bothered me. I also felt like this story is, like, a really long one. Is a little bit chunky, and we spent so much time in the before and then at the castle, and like the build up, the build up to everything, and a bit of time at the castle without getting a lot of information about the castle, and then there's like the big climactic scene was just rushed. It honestly, it just kind of ended all of a sudden. So, yeah, I did end up rating this higher because I flew through it. I was totally engaged the entire time, but ultimately left me wishing that there was just some more overall, like more of an ending, more details, and definitely more personality. But yeah, I did give it 4 stars though. So, then we have something completely different. I feel like I need to give context for this, but I'm gonna tell you what it is first, and then I'll give you the context for it. So the next thing I read was Fertilized in Space by Fiona Thompson. Alice, the main character, is abducted after her job one night, whisked into space. What is the aliens' plan? Use her as an incubator for their alien eggs, since their race doesn't have enough females. What is her bigger problem? Well, she has to constantly have sex with one of the aliens to ensure that those eggs turn into alien babies. And she might be falling in love with the alien who is tasked to service her. So yeah, I read this. Or rather, I listened to it being read. I swear I did not go looking for this. This is, yeah. So I started listening to a true crime podcast. It like does true crime and paranormal stuff. I'm not sure how I feel about the podcast yet. It's called Necronomipod. Jury's still out on this, whether I'm going to continue listening to this or not. Sometimes it's really good, and then sometimes it gives me the ick. So I don't know. Anyway, for a Patreon sample episode, the hosts of the show decided they were going to read and react to short paranormal erotica stories. And this one happened to be a novella that one of them read on the podcast episode. Can I just tell you, there's really nothing more awkward than listening to something like this at work and be laughing your ass off, and then have like a coworker ask you, "What are you laughing about?" and trying to figure out how to answer that question. I don't really want to kink shame anyone, but this is clearly someone's fetish. I looked up the Goodreads, and guys, the author writes only like weird pregnancy erotica, and by weird, I'm not trying to like yuck anyone's yum, but I mean weird, because I read her entire like everything, and there's a lot of tentacles going on in here. Also ghosts and various cryptids, and a lot of things. A lot of things happening in here, but the one constant is being impregnated. So yes, that is obviously some type of fetish. Again, I'm not trying to yuck anyone's yum, but yeah, I don't think this book was done either in like the Chuck Tingle kind of way, where everything is like, I don't think his books are like trying to be erotic in any sense of the word. They are just pure entertainment. He is like, it's a tongue-in-cheek kind of like, haha. This is just a little bit titillating, but also mostly just hilarious and meta and everything. But honestly, besides like the awkwardness in general with this particular novella, the writing itself honestly could have used more editing overall. Like there were yeah, it needed more editing. It is now officially the weirdest thing that I've ever read, and I have read a lot of weird shit at this point, so congratulations. If this is like your thing, I'm so happy for you. I assumed before I listened to this that this kind of stuff would not be my thing, and it was wholeheartedly confirmed that it is not. I didn't rate this because how the fuck even do I? Yep. So then, the next book that I read was another Niall Marsh. Is actually the last of the Niall Marsh that I grabbed, and it is Scales of Justice. So old Sir Harold Lacklander is dying. He knows it, and so does everyone else. So he entrusts a very important document to his old friend Colonel Cartwright. This document is his memoirs. A chapter of which is going to be very controversial and disturbing to their idyllic community of Chining. When Carteret is found murdered by a stream later on and the chapter copy is missing, Inspector Roderick Allen is back on the case. So this was my favorite of Marsha's books that I've read so far. It was twisty, turny, mystery full of intrigue and eccentric characters set in the backdrop of a tiny English village. And I loved every second of it, even though I found a couple of the characters fairly distasteful, especially the previous activities of one of the characters. I found that pretty distasteful, but there's more going on with that situation. I don't want to give stuff away in case you want to read it, but there's yeah. I think overall though with this book, the work relationship and friendship between Chief Inspector Allen and Inspector Fox, or Brer Fox as Allen usually calls him, I think that's the best. They tease each other like good friends because they work so well with each other, almost reading each other's minds at certain points. Their friendship and work relationship was shown in a couple of the other books that I'd read, but it was just so significant in here, and I think it was honestly my favorite part of this book, was just their interactions and them working things out. And yeah, I really like Roderick Allen, but I absolutely I adore Fox. I think he's great. He's wonderful. The small village setting was also intriguing and fun, just looking at completely interwoven and complicated relationships between all of these people who are kind of involved in the murder. There's a bit of classism and romance and castes and secrets upon secrets, and this book was honestly exactly what I was hoping for with these mysteries. So I was ecstatic, pretty much. I gave this 5 stars. Another book I read this month was Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. So this is about Billy Pilgrim, his time as a POW during World War II, and how he and a few others survived the firebombing of Dresden, Germany. It is also about his life before and after the war, including those years in which he time traveled and was also abducted by aliens. Or is it? The anti-war novel melding dark satire with PTSD and the horrors of wartime. I thought this book was so bizarre and funny as a teen, and while it is still very ooh, excuse me, puberty, shit, what happened? While it's still very bizarre, and a couple of parts did make me laugh a little bit, I was mostly just riveted and a little bit horrified. So as you can see, I ended up annotating this. It was just a simple annotation, basically just marking quotes that struck me as funny or quite profound, or maybe even a little fucked up. I need to read you some quotes because just damn. One of the first ones, this was one of the ones that made me decide. These 2 quotes were what made me decide that I wanted to annotate this or mark things. So the writer is having a conversation with an old war buddy, and or he's having a conversation with a movie maker, and the movie maker says, "Is it an anti-war book?" "Yes," I said, "I guess." You know what I say to people when I hear they're writing anti-war books? No, what do you say, Harrison Starr? I say, why don't you write an anti-glacier book instead? What he meant, of course, was that there would always be wars, that they were as easy to stop as glaciers. I believe that too. Also, this one. I have this disease late at night sometimes, involving alcohol and the telephone. I get drunk and I drive my wife away with a breath like mustard gas and roses, and then speaking gravely and elegantly into the telephone, I ask the telephone operators to connect me with this friend or that one from whom I have not heard in years. This one got me too. In the beginning of the book, this isn't really much of a, I don't think this is really much of a spoiler. In the beginning of the book, the writer goes to visit an old war friend and try to talk about the war because he's working on this novel. And the old war buddy's, like, his wife's really not happy that he is there and writing this book and everything. And finally it comes out, like, why she's kind of upset. She asks him, like, how are you going to write this book? She's like, you'll pretend you were men instead of babies, and you'll be played in the movies by Frank Sinatra and John Wayne or some of those other glamorous, war-loving, dirty old men, and war will look just wonderful, so we'll have a lot more of them. They'll be fought by babies like the babes upstairs. So then I understood. It was war that made her so angry. She didn't want her babies or anyone else's babies killed in wars, and she thought wars were partly encouraged by books and movies. So I held up my right hand and I made her a promise. Mary, I said, I don't think this book of mine is ever going to be finished. I must have written 5,000 pages by now and thrown them all away. If I ever do finish it, though, I give you my word of honor. There won't be a part for Frank Sinatra or John Wayne. I tell you what, I said, I'll call it The Children's Crusade. Which is actually part of the very long title page that's on here. A lot. He said, I have told my sons that they are not under any circumstances to take part in massacres, and that the news of massacres of enemies is not to fill them with satisfaction or glee. I feel like I could just spend some more time reading more quotes to you guys, but I think you'd be lost with some of them. But it's such a quotable book. Like I said, I read this first as a teen. I can't remember when exactly. I can't remember when exactly that we read this. I think it was around the time we were studying World War II, which we did in part in both like the 10th and the 11th grade, which means it was either 10th grade when we also like read Night by Elie Wiesel, which is also really rough but a good book to read. And we watched like Schindler's List, excuse me, or 11th grade because we like read Hiroshima, which is also rough but important read. And we like watched videos of like about World War II and like the aftermath and like different things. So with that context in general, as well as like, you know, this was me at a younger age and not really knowing a lot of shit at the time, I think that ultimately this book was like a welcome relief from the other tough like things that we were studying, because that's mostly what I remember about reading this the first time, was writing "so it goes," which is something that's repeated a lot in here, and just writing that like dramatically or sarcastically, and like notes or slipping into essays, or laughing over doodles of the Tralfamadorians with my best friend. Like we draw that on notes with each other and we laugh about it. The Tralfamadorians, oh, so hard to say. Tralfamadorians are an alien race that abducts Billy Pilgrim at a couple of points in the novel, and they are green aliens, green all over, with a hand. They're basically a hand on top with an eye, a green eye in the middle, and they are like this sitting on top of a bathroom plunger. So that's basically, yeah, I'm sure there's more to unpack about that whole thing, but there's a lot going on in this book, so I didn't really like take the time to try to unpack what that whole like alien image is supposed to be about, but yeah. I feel like it's almost maybe ironic that someone is now shooting, and I'm talking about this. Okay. But this is like the anti-war novel, and it had, like I said, just so much to unpack. It has so much to do with like the firebombing of Dresden, which is something that I don't think is really talked about too much. I mean, I'm sure it is talked about more now since this book has existed than it did before. But I don't really remember us talking about it too much when I was in school either. I think we discussed it around the time when we were reading this because, I mean, that's part of the book. But I do think, that that's also an important, like, event that people should know about and should remember. There were multiple atrocities in that war because at the end of the day, war is hell. And while it can, make people into heroes, it also turns a lot of people into monsters. I ended up actually looking up Vonnegut after I finished like reading this, because I was wondering, he's writing about this, and I was like, you know what? I don't know. Was he in the war? He was. He actually survived the firebombing of Dresden, much like Billy Pilgrim did. Which leaves me to wonder if parts of the novel that are like not about the protagonist, Billy Pilgrim, are actually autobiographical. That I'm not 100% sure on. If you happen to know more, please let me know. But yeah, he slipped in all these like weird, darkly satirical bits to make like a point, and I think he was also using it maybe as a way to like deal with PTSD. There's little details within the book, especially involving like the time traveling and stuff, that I think does seem to hint that like these bouts of time traveling and like the alien abduction are really like the character kind of like disassociating or trying to disassociate from the trauma, and like, or trying to not remember certain aspects of things that happened, but trying to deal with it, I also I didn't really like Billy Pilgrim, but I almost wonder if that was like part of the point, if Vonnegut was like trying to make an unlikable character to make a point, or if that was also part of him dealing with his own past, if that was to be making someone completely flawed and unlikable as like a stand-in or something. I still honestly have a lot of questions about this book, and I still have like reviews and ultimate like breakdowns to listen to and watch, having to do with this to fully like unpack everything. But though there were parts of it that were pretty upsetting, I did enjoy revisiting this. I think this was a good place to start with Vonnegut again, rereading this, and I can't wait to check out his other books in the future. I gave this 5 stars. Okay, down to the last couple of books. First of which was Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw. This is the classic tale of a man who falls in love with his creation, sort of. Grumpy and rude linguist Henry Higgins takes a Cockney flower girl named Eliza Doolittle under his wing in order to turn her into a society lady. Shenanigans ensue. If you've seen My Fair Lady, this is it, but without music. So I enjoyed this play a lot up until the ending, basically. I liked most of the characters, namely Eliza, Higgins, and Colonel Pickering, who is a friend of Higgins and also kind of an amateur like linguist. Found Higgins to be somehow kind of endearing, even though he's pretty much an asshole the whole time. While classism is definitely like a thing in this book and could possibly be argued that it's making a like message for people to stay within their own lane, basically, I don't really think that's what Shaw was ultimately going for with this play. And I don't really think that's what the publisher meant either, just based upon like the preface and things like that in here. I think what Shaw was actually trying to say was that oftentimes people are thoughtless when dealing with others, especially when, you know, it involves an idle project taken on by rich, privileged people such as like Higgins. He and Pickering, when starting this project of helping Eliza improve her speech and like, you know, helping her get ahead in life, they didn't really like stop to think of the problems that they were going to be given to Eliza. You know, she wanted to learn how to speak better so she could gain more opportunities for herself, like the possibility of being taken seriously enough to be able to own her own flower shop and give services to rich, privileged people instead of selling her wares on the streets and dealing with all of that. Like, that's what she was ultimately looking for, but they ended up raising her to the point that basically her only future would be to, you know, marry well, which she might not even be able to do because she doesn't have a dowry, and, you know, her family isn't like the right sort, basically. Her dad's also a character in here he's a lot. I think this play really took like some stabs at like society as well. Overall, I was pretty much enjoying it up until the sudden abrupt ending. It's just going along. There's like a conversation kind of happening. And then like, here's the play, and then there's this. And this is just the epilogue. The rest of the story need not be shown in action, and indeed would hardly need telling if our imaginations were not so enfeebled by their lazy dependence on the ready-mades and reach-me-downs of the rag shop in which romance keeps its stock of happy endings to misfit all stories. Here's my note from college. Damn, it feels unfinished. What the hell, Shaw? And I think I have another note in here at the end. Yeah, what the hell, George Bernard Shaw? Linda, this was one of my professors in school. Linda would not be pleased if you were a workshop student with this long letter instead of playing the whole damn thing out. Yeah, I was mad. I was mad when we covered this in college. And I'd forgotten that this was the ending that was in here, so I was kind of mad again a little bit. I did give this 5 stars for the rest of the writing. Not the ending. The ending's just like, what was he thinking? But, yeah. The rest of the writing I enjoyed. And the growth in Eliza I enjoyed. And also I have a lot of nostalgia for My Fair Lady because I love that musical and I love Audrey Hepburn. So, yeah. Last couple of books I read, I'm actually going to talk about at the same time because they were Mouse, Volume 1, My Father Bleeds History, and Mouse, Volume 2, and Here My Troubles Began, and these are both by Art Spiegelman. So, Art Spiegelman tackled in here the story of his parents' survival in Poland during World War II, including their time spent at Auschwitz and Birkenau. He does this by illustrating everyone as anthropomorphic animals. I can't really say that this was an enjoyable read. I also don't want to continue to hold up books that have swastikas on them. Okay, I can't say that this was really an enjoyable read. It is dealing with like one of the worst atrocities in recent history, but I think that's also what makes this an incredibly important read. I really liked that, you know, these graphic novels were not only talking about the author's, like, his family's survival, or, to be honest, not a lot of his family survived. It wasn't only talking about that. It also kept jumping back and forth with him documenting the process of making this. which covered his very complicated relationship with his parents. His mother completed suicide in the 1960s, and that is something that he still feels guilt over, as well as like partially blaming his father for. He and his dad don't really get along that well. Neither of them really seem to be able to accept who the other person is. And I think a big part of this is also the generational trauma that is existing there. Spiegelman really gets into it more in like volume 2, when he's explaining like his childhood to his fiance, like full of like nightmares of the SS coming to get him, feeling guilt as a kid for not having gone through the terrible experience like his family did, and also dealing with having a ghost brother that definitely haunted his folks. And that was an older brother of his who died before he met him during the war. I think his brother was like 4 or 5 at the time of his death. So he kind of says at one point that he has a ghost for a brother. I think that this was ultimately a very important story that needs to be told. First of all, as catharsis for the author. He's dealing with like a lot, so I think that was very important for him to be able to tell that first and foremost. And second of all, I think it's very important for the rest of us to read. You know, we are unfortunately in an age where a lot of people who were there, who were there, who knew about it, who witnessed it, who experienced it, who survived it, who at least who lived through the war as well, like, they're not really around anymore for the most part. And as a result, I think we have people in this fucking year of 2023 who genuinely do not believe that the Holocaust happened. Like, I didn't think this was a thing until I was really spending time on the internet in the past year or so and seeing a lot more comments from people who seem to think that it didn't happen. And that is, that's a lot to unpack too. But that's ultimately why stories like this are so important, you know, to remind us what human beings are capable of, which is both the absolutely horrific, but also the will to survive. And we have to remember to honor those who were lost and to try to ultimately keep history from repeating itself. Hopefully. So yeah, basically, fuck anyone who bans or wants to ban this book. Seriously, go fuck yourself. I wasn't going to rate these originally because it is a personal account, and I haven't been, I know I say this like a lot, but I haven't been like rating personal accounts for the most part, just because it just ends up feeling weird to rate how someone wrote about it. But just because of how well thought out and well done this was, and like the visual aspect of this as well, I just felt like I needed to give it a rating, and both of them are like 5-star reads. If you want to read these, which I suggest you do, basically just, this has all of the trigger warnings, like probably all of them, but you know, if you can, please do pick it up. So yeah, folks, that was basically everything that I ended up reading in May. Variety. I did shockingly manage to read most things that were on my, most of the things that were on my TBR for the month. I still have a couple of books that I didn't finish, but I'm still reading. I'm probably just gonna like either try to get to them in June, or I'll get to them this summer anyway. But yeah, this is what I read. It wasn't too bad. If you've read any of these books, please do let me know your thoughts down below. Let me know if you guys are like interested in any of them. So anyway, thank you guys for watching. Thank you for always watching. If you're new here and would like to subscribe, please consider doing so. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.